Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the offices of the Irish Human Rights Equality Commission, or IHREC. My name is Damien Walsh. I'm the CEO of Independent Living Movement Ireland, ILMI. We're a national cross-impairment disabled persons organisation. Firstly, I'd like to thank IHREC for giving us the room again. They've been very generous with their time to launch a number of ILMI events in the past, so I'd like to acknowledge their support of the work that we do. I've just to perform a few functional duties in relation to the space itself. Just to note, exit and fire assembly points. There are 3 exits from the event room, 1 at the back and 2 at the side where you came through. You exit through the door in the reception area where you enter, and the fire assembly point is across the street from the IHREC building. Toilets are out through the main reception area to the right, and there is a disabled toilet beside the main reception desk. There is also a changing place available if needed. So I'd like to thank you on behalf of Independent Living Movement Ireland to join us for the launch of a Manifesto for Change, disabled people taking control of state-funded disability services. It's a really important document. It sets out a policy context for why this change is necessary, and very clearly demonstrates how disabled people taking control will ensure that person-centred services truly meet the needs of disabled people, and that we really have investment and inclusion in Ireland. Fortunately, I'm not speaking today, so you're going to be brought through this journey, a rare moment where I'm not speaking. I'm delighted to be joined by Des Kenny, the ILMI Chairperson, who will provide a context for why we've developed this position paper. Jacqui Browne, the Secretary of ILMI, will provide a policy context for the manifesto. We're delighted to be joined by Niall Crowley from Values Lab, who will talk about the public sector duty. We'll then have Peter Kearns, the ILMI DPO Development Officer, speak about the social model and how that needs to inform any of the work in relation to the UNCRPD and disability services in Ireland. And then finally, ILMI's Voice Community Development Worker, Paula Soraghan, will actually outline the key asks in the manifesto. What are we calling for in change and how we want to see that implemented? So before I pass over to Des, I'd like to thank you all very, very much for joining us. We will close at 1 p.m. on the button. If anyone is in a rush, please do take lunch with you. And if not, just please stay on and spend some time talking to each other. Thank you very much. I'll pass to Des.
Thanks, Damien. Thank you again for attendance here today. I've met some people whom I recognise, and the sad thing is they also know my legacy of being a bit of a devil and whatnot, but they have agreed to be quietly supportive of the day. And supportive of the day in many ways is the evolution of what we have arrived at in the Manifesto for Change. The extent to which we have moved to a point in the evolution of service provision to the inclusion and development of the DPO network and the DPO integrity, and people within those networks and within the collective of ILMI having a voice. What has been written down in the paper has been a distillation of the members, what they talked about, what they rehearsed, what they tried to frame and went back and conditionally reorganised and again framed, and we have what is now today a document. I was mindful of when I was talking earlier with Edna Fitzgerald and Tony O'Shea, how I started almost half a century ago in the National League of the Blind of Ireland, which was the first DPO, I imagine, in the state, where we organised within the context of a trade union movement. It's a long journey from the National League of the Blind in '74 to where we are today. And along the way, all of us in some way or other have contributed and benefit from the good work which has been done by organisations, which really, and it must be recognised, without their existence, probably a lot of what we have achieved in education, extensive introduction to employment and assistive technology wouldn't have happened. I think what has happened, though, is the staying with us and supporting us along the way and being our companions has wound up later in the control of how we think and whatnot, because as we have grown, a bit like children in a family, as we've grown, as wise as the parents, and sometimes wiser, we are still perceived as the conditional children or lesser beings within the system. So what we're trying to do and bring to you today is the sense of a rightful access into the inner sanctum, from the decision processes around policy to the manipulation, if you like, of the handles of power on the boards and at the top and in employment. It is a sad thing to say that people with disabilities and disabled people do not fill any significant quota within the employment of organisations. And that arises from the terrible conditional thing that has gone on within the formation and the continued segregation. That if you work in the area of intellectual disability, you only think in terms of employing people with intellectual disability. The extent to which the organisationals must be moved into consideration of the entitlement of the community. And I don't necessarily like the word of community, as though we're, again, a segregated, separate population. But unless we are perceived as part of the generality of the employment workforce and a sufficiently intelligent quota of people to take control and participate in the services, I have very little to say beyond look at the document, take care of it, and I'm glad to see that people with whom I've soldiered, as I say, with down the years are here, and I see them as friends who will take what's written here and present it today as a stepping stone or another twist in the path towards a straighter access into service delivery for disabled people. I remember years ago I tried to deal with this thing when I was probably again in my 20s, in terms of I felt we were typecast disabled people. And I wrote lines that said, we who sit in so many rooms waiting, watching for the door to open, what holds us there watching, always waiting. So, ladies and gentlemen, it's at the end of waiting. We have the policy today. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. Jacqui Browne is my name. I'm, as Damien said in the introductions earlier, Secretary of ILMI. Thank you, Jake, for your opening remarks, and it's really good to remind ourselves of our long history in getting to where we are today, and we still have some way to go, as we all know. But before I say a few words, I would like to just take a moment for us all to pause, particularly now during this particular hour, that we are also, I suppose, celebrating, acknowledging the very tragic and untimely death of our colleague, friend, and the life and the legacy of Lee Gatz. Lee was a member of ILMI, and as a thalidomide survivor, I would have known her as well for many, many years, long before she even became confidential recipient under the HSE as a result of another traumatic history, part of the history of the disability movement, directly as an outcome of the shameful happenings in Orsa Tracta, for those of you who may bring your minds back to that. And Lee undertook so much advocacy work on behalf of extremely vulnerable disabled people, and we must never forget her legacy in undertaking that task so selflessly. So I just would I'd like to acknowledge her own life and legacy, and also the fact that her funeral mass is happening as we speak here today. So for those reasons, we are urging people not to issue anything on social media just for a couple of hours, just to give the family that bit of space until her funeral is over. That's really out of respect to her as well. It wouldn't be nice for us to be going on celebrating something while there's mourning going on at another level, if that's okay with people. So to return to the focus of today and the launch of our document, a manifesto for change, and this is where we're talking about disabled people finally, ultimately and rightly taking control of state-funded disability services. We've spoken about it for many years, in many fora, at many meetings, with government ministers, etc. But we have now got a document, putting it together. There's nothing hugely new in the document, but it's putting it all together in one document, so that it's something each of you can bring to your own settings, each of you can use in your own work, locally, nationally, and indeed internationally as appropriate. So in terms of the policy context, what I want to say to you is that we know that there have been repeated commitments to the changing services, and we're in the thick of it at the moment, actually, very excitingly, and with great hope and anticipation, genuinely, in the development of the new National Disability Strategy, as but one example, which will also incorporate the Disability Action Plan, as I look at people like Edna Fitzgerald here, who've been deeply involved in that part of the process, and I'll be speaking to that very briefly as well. So just to remind ourselves, Ireland invests over 2.2 billion, not million, billion euros to provide supports and services to disabled people. But I would emphasise that's not all disabled people. We know that there's a huge level of unmet need. So that's really important, that it's still actually not to disabled people, to some disabled people. And we have to look at the value for money and also meeting the level of huge unmet need in this country. So all of this money, or nearly all of it, is managed by what we refer to as disability service providers, usually through annual grants that are provided by the state under a service level agreement to the service providers to deliver services. But we have had, and we still continue to have, very little control or say in how that money is spent, or more importantly, the types of supports or services that disabled people receive. The value for money and policy review of disability services over 12 years ago, it proposed a fundamental change in the approach to the governance, the funding and the focus of disability services going forward, from an approach that was predominantly centred on group-based therapies, group-based services, group-based delivery models, towards a more holistic, person-centred model and individually chosen supports by an individual. And that value for money policy review over 12 years ago, as I say, it stated that the future delivery of services and supports to disabled people should acknowledge the views of stakeholders that choice, control, independence and community inclusion are the keys to an effective person-centred service. Now, we would have a little issue with the word even acknowledge, because we now know, as a result of the CRPD, we're long beyond the stage of acknowledgement or even consultation. We now have a role to be involved centrally going forward. Equally, the Transforming Lives programme is also tasked with implementing the recommendations of this value for money policy review. It states its commitment to improving the delivery of health and social care services to people with disabilities arising from the policy review on value for money. And this was based on enshrining the principles of self-determination and autonomy in all service provision for those with disabilities. That's a quote. So here we're beginning to see the beginnings of agency, choice and control coming through. In words, I might add, on a document, but we'll see about the reality later on. The HSE then new directions report of the National Working Group of HSE-funded adult day services back in 2012, so that's 12 years ago, is based on the principle that disabled people will be included in society, and it recognised that day services, segregated day services are very much contrary to that principle. So again, they reiterated that having choices, doing interesting and useful things with one's time, learning new skills, meeting people and enjoying their company, these are the things that people and most people take for granted, but not afforded to so many people in segregated settings. These are the ordinary day life experiences that people with disabilities tell us that they want to have, just like anyone else. The way in which adult day services have evolved over the years has tended to get in the way of these very reasonable and rational expectations of disabled adults. Our adult day services have for the most part been organised as very segregated services, separate from local communities, offering limited options, experiences and choices. And the report made in 2012 was making or proposing radical proposals and recommendations to that lived experience of disabled people. And currently, and you can see it on the HSE New Directions website, it also noted that a benchmarking exercise, that's like a comparative exercise, that was completed in 2015, confirmed that there's a commitment to changing this lived experience of disabled people, and that many service providers have or are in the process of moving ahead and to commencing an approach to service delivery that focuses on the provision of supports for disabled people. However, the day service, as we know, is most diverse, and significant service change and reconfiguration has yet to be progressed, and that is currently still the situation. 3 years ago, we are aware of an internal Department of Health review of disability policy in general, and that also confirms that whilst the rhetoric of inclusion, mainstreaming and person-centred services is being used, there's actually very little evidence of individualised service provision, with a lack of standard needs assessment and the provision still of largely based services in groups. Even though many services purport to or pretend to use person-centred planning, the quality of the person-centred plan can be negated if the options remain and are framed largely in terms of the current model of provision. For example, some day services may be described as supporting community participation, inverted commas, although this often in reality includes people or service users attending a community setting as a group, in a group, on a special bus, in a segregated manner, having, say, for example, a special hour in the swimming pool just for them and no one else, or bowling sessions, or take whatever other hobby or interest you might have. So those within the group actually are not experiencing integrated mainstream community living. They have not, and often many of them have not selected that particular group activity that was predetermined for them rather than by them. And this is very different to what we envisage as an individual choosing and having the right to have the choice and the control to attend whatever they wish, be that a swimming lesson, travelling to the swimming pool on public transport, taking a lesson with a support person if they so wish, not necessarily a health care social support professional. So these are just mere examples to give you a flavour of what we're still talking about today in 2024. Additionally, Ireland has other policies such as a time to move on from congregated settings, which is a national plan for the process of de-institutionalising, that is taking people out of institutions, large institutions, into smaller group houses, homes, and in the community, very importantly. Primarily, de-institutionalisation, or what is sometimes referred to as decongregated settings, is a population of people who have high-level support needs, but they are predominantly also people with intellectual or learning disabilities, and they need support. So what we need now is we also have, as well as this, like I'm just rattling off a range of reports and policies and documents, which I think adds to the whole complexity of the issue. We also have the Wasted Lives report, which is only 3 years old, alongside the most recent report, or it's not a report actually, it's the National Housing Strategy for Disabled People. And this is a strategy that we really have some faith and hope with. And we're really beginning to see the first time a sense of agency, choice, control and a human rights-based approach coming. And hats off to everyone involved. And indeed, I know ILMI were deeply involved in that as well. So I think that's something ILMI should be proud of as well. But all of these reports together, what they convey is the intention that disabled people should be able to live lives of their choice in their communities with choice and control over their everyday lives. And we must be afforded that, and this is particularly required now under the CRPD, the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. So, however, we're still grappling with, and the reality is, in the absence of disabled people being in leadership positions of governance and management, it is clear that the state policies to promote inclusion are not being implemented, and that there is really an urgent need for reform of these services, particularly ensuring that services that supposedly cater for our needs or our friends' needs are actively co-designed and managed by disabled people. The Action Plan for Disability Services 2024-26, it notes the reform vision of transforming life programmes has been hampered by legacy issues in the service delivery landscape. That's a really big statement to make, and that is the reality of it too. So we have to break that down and create change. The action plan also seeks to invigorate and expand the reform agenda. And the ILMI position paper being launched here today really gives some concrete examples and ideas on how this reform agenda needs to be led and driven by disabled people. So while we have all the policies and have had and will continue to have policies around reforming our services, it is still our collective view that the way to ensure that these reforms are prioritised is by giving us control of these organisations, disabled services that are accountable to disabled people, led by disabled people and staffed by disabled people, will ensure that what the state invests in will always be about our full and active participation in society. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much. My name is Niall Crowley and I'm from Values Lab. And I was very pleased to be asked to speak today to this Manifesto for Change, partly because because its importance itself, but particularly, I suppose, because of how it approaches what's called the public sector equality and human rights duty and how it presents it as a key lever for change. Now, it's not the only lever for change, and Jacqui has very clearly outlined a whole series of levers for change. But it is an important and unique one, and it's important, I suppose, in the context that Des has outlined, and where change is all too often so slow and so hard fought. And we need such levers in such a context, and we need to know how to put them into good use. And the ILMI Manifesto for Change, I think, has served us well and will serve us well in that regard. The public sector duty is not new. It came into law in 2014, 10 years ago, under Section 42 of the Irish Human Rights and Equality Commission Act. But it's only now it's actually getting some traction and being properly implemented. So, without a doubt, change is slow, but without a doubt, change is happening. And it's a very important moment, therefore, I think, to be launching this manifesto for change. The duty, the public sector equality and human rights duty, has real potential for change and to drive change. It reflects a significant shift in our approach to equality and human rights, a shift from a reactive approach to a proactive approach. Previous equality legislation places the burden on disabled people to make the move, to make the complaint, to take the case. And that's not easy, and it takes courage. And yet I know there are people in this room who've taken that route and done so to great effect and with great success. At the same time, that reactive approach is not enough, and what the duty does, it requires a proactive approach. It shifts the burden onto public bodies to be proactive in taking action to address equality and human rights issues, and that is an important step. The particular duty we have has added potential, because it shifts the focus from requiring people of goodwill in public bodies to do things, some things, for equality and human rights, so that change does happen. It shifts the focus onto the systems of those organisations, requiring the systems of those organisations, whoever is in those organisations, to drive that change for equality and human rights. And that's why this duty is so interesting and so well called up on in the Manifesto for Change. Sorry. So, what is the duty and what are these systems? Because it's important that we're clear about them. It's very broadly, sorry, you'll have to weed me out. It's very broadly stated in the legislation, the duty. Public bodies must have regard to the need to eliminate discrimination, promote equality of opportunity, and protect human rights. To do so in relation to their staff, service users, and policy beneficiaries, and to do so across all of their functions. The groups identified to be a focus for this duty are those groups covered by our equality legislation and the ground of socioeconomic status. That includes disabled people. It also includes the diversity of disabled people in terms of men and women, people of different sexual orientations, people of different ethnicities in that regard, and that's hugely important. So I can see people breathing deeply and saying, well, that's all good, grand, it's public bodies, and we're here to talk about disability service providers, and fair enough. But the key point here is it covers all the functions of the public body. It covers the procurement function, where they buy in services, where they fund services. And in a very particular way it covers that public bodies must pass on the duty to those bodies that they procure services from, those bodies that they fund. So the duty is passed on or should be passed on to the disability service provider. And that's extremely relevant, as identified in the Manifesto for Change. So if that's the duty, then what are the systems to give effect to that duty? Again, they're broadly stated, and they do drive this planned and systematic approach to equality that moves beyond the individual of goodwill, that focuses in on the systems of public bodies. IHREC, the Irish Human Rights and Equality Commission, that's in place to support and that has a role to support and monitor the implementation of the duty, has summed up these systems under 3 terms: assess, address and report. Under assess, public bodies have to assess what are the equality and human rights issues. Public bodies and those they fund are required to assess what are the equality and human rights issues that face the identified groups for the duty that are relevant to our functions. What are the equality and human rights issues that face disabled people, the diversity of disabled people, that are relevant to our role as a disability service provider? And IHREC have insisted that this should be evidence-based and it should be participative. So in doing that assessment, there needs to be an engagement with disabled people and disabled people's organisations. And as noted in the Manifesto, there are equality and human rights issues that you would expect to see emerge in any such assessment. Equality and human rights issues for disabled people: unemployment, underemployment, and lack of career progression, lack of access to decision-making positions and decision-making structures, lack of freedoms in terms of self-determination and choice and control over one's life. Just picking 3 that you would expect to see in any such assessment. And you can begin to see how step 2, which requires you to address those issues, might actually drive change. Because under step 2, under the address step, public bodies and those they fund are required to use this evidence, to put in place plans, policies and actions to address those issues. It's an ongoing duty. So it's not just that they put a separate policy in place that they can say we have and ignore. They've got to build it into their mainstream policies, their mainstream plans, their mainstream strategies in an ongoing way, ensure that these drive action to address those equality and human rights issues. So those actions will be, the action on the issues will be served by the plans and policies of the organisation, and change will happen through their internal systems. And also, there's in the guidance from IHREC, it's stressed it's important that bodies take action to enable that to happen as well, so that they train their staff to do so. And again, that's a focus in the Manifesto for Change. So, public bodies and those they fund should assess, well, what are the equality and human rights issues? They should have policies and plans and actions in place to address those. It should be part of their mainstream policies, plans and actions. And then finally, they're required to report on it. So they're required to track progress. They need to report annually on progress in addressing the issues. So they've got to track progress. And if I track progress and I'm not making progress, I should reflect and do better. So it's a chance for reflection and for improvement. So I suppose in naming the public sector equality and human rights duties, the agenda that's thrown up by this document is public bodies need to be compliant with the duty. Public bodies need to be compliant with the duty in terms of their procurement and funding processes, so that the duty is reflected in SLAs and those they fund are required to implement the duty. Disability service providers need to gear up to implement the duty, to assess, address and report, and to do so in a participative way with DPOs. And then DPOs need to do what ILMI is doing to contribute to and communicate an evidence base that would inform the assessment of equality and human rights issues, to seek an engagement and get involved in the implementation of the duty, take advantage of that point made by IHREC that this should be a participative process. And they need to, above all, I think, advocate for the implementation of the duty by public bodies, by disability services. They need to track that implementation, and where it's not happening, they need to report to IHREC and seek action in relation to that. So I think with this document, ILMI have served disabled people well, but I think ILMI have served equality and human rights well in terms of another push behind the public sector equality and human rights duty that has a real capacity to advance change in a quicker way, at least, than what Des previously described. Thank you.
Thanks, Niall. Hi everybody. I'm Peter. Just to tell you, I'm going to talk to you about why I am an anti-party scumbag. That's why. So, and that's looking at the role of the social model in terms of this manifesto. So, before we talk about the social model, we also have to talk about the medical model. So the medical model, I'm not a scumbag. I'm Peter with cerebral palsy. So the medical model, the impairment label takes over. It overshadows everything. So that's why when we're talking about disabled people controlling services, is that we have to identify at the moment where services are coming from. As Dave said at the start, a lot of services are impairment based. They focus on the impairment. So the impairment label, that cancels out rights, it cancels out human rights, because it's about curing or stabilising the impairment. So I had the impairment label of cerebral palsy. I don't want it. I don't identify it quite hard. So that means that the cerebral palsy has to be cured, stabilised or fixed. Or the choice of something like assisted suicide as well. So in terms of the medical model, disabled people are segregated because of the impairment label. And I can give you a funny, ridiculous story about this. In the early 90s, I worked in Belfast, doing workshops, drama workshops. I worked in a special day centre in Belfast, and actually I cracked up laughing. Because the buses were coming from the Falls Road, from the Shankill. All these disabled people put together, and they hated each other. Because they're unions, or they're nationalists, or Republicans. They didn't identify as a Labour. So they hated each other. But the only thing they had in common is that they also hated me from the South. So that shows you how ridiculous it is, the medical model, lumping people together based on the impairment labels. So that's what we have at the moment. That the majority of service providers do that. So how do we change that as DPO? So not only are we transforming the ownership of services, we are also transforming the culture and organisational values of the service as well. So in the social model, as I say, I'm Peter Kearns, the anti-party scumbag. Because like my colleagues here, we're actually from the same road in Killock, just for warning. So in the social model, it's not the disability is not the impairment. The disability is a barrier we encounter as well. But also for people like us, scumbags like us, it's also the recognition of class, gender, sexual background, ethnic background, religious background. So the disabled people become more interesting as well. So in terms of the organisational cultural change, that when we're promoting the social model to organise as part of this transformation, this revolution of disabled people owning themselves to not launching this manifesto, there's also need to for DPOs to be involved in the designing of disability equality training, the implementation and modelling of that training, and also the designing and also delivering that training as well. But not only to managers and staff, but also to disabled, more importantly, to and with disabled people in the day centres. Because disabled people actually require disability qualification far more than non-disabled people as well. So that's transformation. So that's and just to give you an example of that in Sligo, in terms of organisational change and cultural change, and the role of social model. 2018, Sligo County Council adopted the social model to the council on paper. Right? And then 2022 we set up a Sligo DPO. And then 2023 Sligo DPO and ILMI worked on the new disability strategy based on the social model. And that disability strategy is now from 24 to 27. Everything that the council does has to be informed by the social model. And the local DPO will monitor that and work on it. And that includes today, myself and my colleague groups had to go back to Sligo because we're working with the PPN. We're actually going to start training council staff in disability equality in September. So that's an example of an organisational change, transformation of social model. That also has to happen with the service providers. So disabled people not only taking control, but also dictating the values and the organisational policy within social model policy within the services. So that's why, through this manifesto, we hope that every disabled person like me gets a chance to become an arty-farty scumbag. So, thanks for that.
Thank you, Des, Jacqui and Peter for your input so far. They've been very enlightening, and Neil also. So my name is Paula Soraghan and I am a proud disabled woman, and I am the Voice Community Development Worker with Independent Living Movement Ireland. So Des, Jacqui, Neil and Peter have set the context of why ILMI have developed this paper and the legal, policy and social model analysis on why change is necessary. What I want to outline is the specific changes we're calling for in terms of governance, employment and training in disability services. At a governance level, ILMI calls on disability service providers to amend their constitutions to reflect the following. Legally, disabled people must make up the majority of board members, that the chair must always be a disabled person, that there are clear and transparent processes for disabled people to be elected onto their boards, that disabled people who are on the boards are not only service users, in inverted commas, as disability service providers need the perspective of disabled people who experience independent living, non-segregated spaces and inclusion in society. In terms of recruitment, we are calling on service providers to put into plans measures to ensure the active recruitment of disabled people, such as that disabled people are supported under positive action as defined under the Equal Status Acts 2000 to 2016 and under the National Disability Strategy to actively recruit disabled people for all roles within the organisation. That service level agreements between the HSE and Section 38 and Section 39 funded organisations makes reference to commitments under Section 42 of the Irish Human Rights and Equality Commission Act 2014. That service level agreements between the HSE and Section 38 and Section 39 funded organisations refer to supporting disabled people to be actively involved in DPOs locally and nationally as per state commitments under the UN CRPD. Disabled service providers need to set out in a clear manner, with processes and policies stated, targets set as part of their public sector duty, and report on this every year. ILMI, as a DPO, can support and work with organisations based on our principles of participation, inclusion, equality and empowerment. As a DPO, we can also clearly communicate the message that change is essential and cannot be ignored or delayed. External supports and schemes for supporting governance, such as the Charity Regulator, the Charities Institute and Good Governance Awards, have a role in highlighting the need for greater inclusion on boards and review targets set by disability service providers to ensure progress is made by disability service providers in ensuring disabled people are supported to take on key management roles. The Action Plan for Disability Services 2024 to 2026 commitment to review management information requirements and performance indicators to manage and monitor services and putting in place of improved systems. From an ILMI perspective, this review of performance indicators needs to include measures in relation to recruitment of disabled people and measures to ensure governance of disability services by disabled people. This review of service level agreements needs to also enshrine commitments to support disabled people to be involved in their DPOs, whether local or national. SLAs need to reflect that state monies are being used to uphold and implement the UNCRPD, including Article 4.3 of the Convention, and that disability service providers in receipt of state funding have a duty to uphold the Convention as they discharge their functions. DPOs can be a driver for change in this process. They can support senior management and boards of large disability services in how they plan for change. Disabled activists from DPOs can provide social model-led disability equality training to board and senior management to guide a process of transformation, thus enabling a move from a medicalised approach to disability to more emancipatory approaches informed by the social model. ILMI is committed to working with disabled people in services, as well as the staff and management of services, to ensure that the targets set out in new directions are realised and led by disabled people. ILMI is committed to working with the Department of Children, Disability, Integration and Youth, HSE, politicians, policy makers and equality and human rights organisations to ensure that principles of the UNCRPD are practised in state-funded services across the country. Thank you very much.
Many thanks, Paula, Peter, Niall, Jacqui and Des for their presentations today. I just want to close by obviously thanking everyone for their attendance. Des noted at the start that this document being launched is only the starting point. Everyone that's here today and people that we'll engage with, whether directly or online, is to bring this to life. Because this demand came directly from our members in a consultation process for what the change they wanted to see and the process of that change could be delivered. So it's a really important document. It's an important moment for ILMI as a disabled persons organisation. I want to thank again IHREC for hosting this event. I'd specifically like to thank John Owens and Angela for recording the event, and they'll edit it so it'll be available online. But I also want to thank the commitment that people have shown today and people who couldn't attend that recognise the value of this document, that it can be a potential driver for much needed change to really drive inclusion for disabled people in the 21st century. Before we go, I just want to recognise that this is one of the last days of employment for Dr. James Casey, our policy officer. James has been an integral part of the ILMI team since he joined in 2019. He performed a role as part of the cross-border IHREC funded on-site project and later became our policy officer. James is also a very active member up until that point. He spoke at our AGM and relaunch of ILMI in 2018 to much fanfare, and he's been a much loved member of the staff team, and we want to wish him all the very best on his future endeavours with Christian Blind Missions Ireland. And he's going to be supporting the work of DPO development internationally. So just we could have a moment of recognition for the work of Dr. James and all that he has done. I got to do it. I got to make him feel embarrassed. It's taken 5 years, but I got there. It's usually the other way around. I'm usually sitting there going, what's he going to say next? So thanks again, James. Thank you all so much for being with her today. And those of you who can, please stay with us for a chance to network and have a bit of lunch. Thank you so much. Oh, sorry, before we go, I want to thank Michael so much for providing ISL and for making this space inclusive, not only now, but when we edit it as well, that other deaf people who couldn't attend this event are able to get to know what this Manifesto of Change is all about. Thank you so much. Ruth, can you just tell us a little bit about what the day meant to you?
Hi, I'm Ruth. Yeah, no, it was really exciting and interesting to see all the work that's been put into it, and it's just really exciting as a member of a local DPO to see the potential of what we can do, and I'm really appreciative of all the people that came before us in ILMI that put all this work into action that we now get to put into practice, and that's what I'm excited about.
Hi, I'm Derek Gore. I'm with the Disability Action Collective. It's a local grassroots DPO that we've established since 2017. It's still going strong, and through that work we've linked in with the ILMI, and we've really enjoyed the work we've done with the ILMI, particularly around the workshops, developing their understanding around human rights and equality for disability. And that was a big reason why we're here today, not just the invite. We wanted to be part of what took place today, you know.
My name is Jean Hall. Glad to know that change hopefully will happen, and that disabled people will be involved or, you know, consulted, and change will happen. You know, that it's very important that instead of policy being made by people that don't know what's going on, that people with the disability, like myself, as a blind person, they'd be more aware, more involved, or, you know, to ask what works and what doesn't work.
Hi, good afternoon. It was great to be here today. My name is Morgan McKnight. I'm from an organisation called Aishinat Takiakta, which is the AT network. And again, it contributes to the independent life by working with people with disabilities to agree a personalised budget with the HSE that they can manage themselves, you know, that they can buy their own services, that they're not dependent on others to provide them for them. They can actually use their funding, their PA hours to provide that service for themselves. So if they need someone at 12 o'clock midnight on a Sunday, they have the capacity within themselves to make sure that they have somebody in place to cover out those hours. Today's speeches and what people gathered from today was, you know, there was a great expectation. I know Charles Dickens has been talking about great expectations for hundreds of years, but we ourselves have a great expectation, and it's something that, you know, it should be something that's delivered in the norm. Your colleague there was talking about kind of the Sligo County Council and their DPO. You know, that should be something similar across all local authorities. We shouldn't just be praising one for doing what they should do. We should be expecting it from all local authorities to do exactly the same thing. Damien, yourself, I'd just like to say you've put on a great thing. You know, your document is great. I've had a look at it, and, you know, it gives us a great opportunity for all of us to work together going down the same agenda, which I think is vitally important. Sometimes the independent sector can be seen as kind of working in splendid isolation. I think we need to take this opportunity to make a collaborative approach to what we do. We're all looking for the same thing and in the best interest of people with disabilities. So let's use our combined relationships, combined energies to get what we need done.
Hi, my name is Mahbub Kabir. I work for Christian Blind Mission Ireland. It's great to be here. Especially it helped me to change my perspective of like how these services were run, like historically, not having disabled people as part of making the decisions for whom these services are meant to. So it's a game changer for me. And I see the history is like unfolding that, well, people with disabilities or disabled people are taking over the power and authority, and that should be the right course of direction of the history. So we are in solidarity with this movement.
We all get chatting together. You know, you don't realise how bad it can be, and it is for people like us. And like that, I'm not long-term disabled like this. I have a lifelong disease that I never knew about till my late 30s, and I ended up in the wheelchair in 2017. And that's when I realised how hard it is for disabled people, and just the simple things in life, the simple everyday things that the barriers are there for. So I think it's really good what's coming in, and I really do hope it works out for everybody. I'm not 100% understanding of a lot of it, but I did have got the books and I am going to read them now and get a better gist of it. But I'm really happy I came today now. I found it very interesting.
Thank you so much, Sandra.